Hey guys, Nolar here. I'm your co-host, back with something new on 5-9, but I am joined by Tystra. Say hello, my friend.
What is up, my dudes?
Alrighty, so before we dive right into this new video we're going to do, if you're new here and like the content, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you know when we're live with other 5-9 videos. And if you already subbed to us, hit that like button and give us a comment down below. It gives us a lot of help and we appreciate it. Alright, with the upcoming release of Mortal Kombat in the movie theaters and HBO Max from Warner Brothers, we all thought it would be awesome to revisit the older Mortal Kombat movie from 1995. Tystra, were you born yet?
Yeah, I was, when it released initially, I was 5 years old, and when I watched it, I was 7.
Okay. All right, good. So, you know, you were born, maybe not so much all of our audience members there, but we were going to give you a recap of what it was. And to me, I was 9 years old when this not so good, but so bad it's good movie came out. So yeah, let's get this out of the way. I think it's one of the better video game adaptation movies. Some people say it's the best, which considering the feel of the time, like we've got Super Mario Brothers, the original Street Fighter with JeanClaude Van Damme, Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li, and Silent Hill, and a whole plethora of other movies. Yeah, that's not an impressive feat because the rest of those are garbage. What are some of the older video game movies that you like or really do not like at all, Tystra?
Well, I mean, comparative to the list that you just listed with the Super Mario Bros. And Street Fighter, like, again, as you said, it wasn't a very impressive feat, but it was definitely something that opened the door for later on, like, certain video game movies, like Resident Evil, the first two.
Yep.
I think we discussed that before, where we both thought that they were genuinely good, and then later on, the next two weren't all that great. There's definitely ones like the new Sonic the Hedgehog movie that came out, which scored relatively well by a lot of fans, and pretty bad ones like Assassin's Creed and such. So
Yeah.
I would honestly have to say, for me, the Mortal Kombat movie, the first one, definitely deserves a little bit of praise. It was kind of like that Pathfinder of
Yep.
when it came to the video game genre.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, even the movies that came after it, like Resident Evil, which is the same director as this movie, to be clear. Yeah, so Paul Anderson. Yeah, he directed this original Mortal Kombat, went to other movies like Death Race and Event Horizon, and then he stuck with all the Resident Evil movies. So yeah, he's a very talented director, I think. And this was, I think, his first big budget movie, Mortal Kombat, which had a $20 million budget, by the way, which back in 1995, if you increase for inflation, it's probably closer to 35-40 million, like almost double the money now.
Oh yeah, that's a big budget.
Yeah, so this was like I said, I think I'd give it a solid 6 or 7 out of 10, but it has to be within the whole spectrum of video game movies. I'm not comparing it to The Matrix or Gone with the Wind or any of those classics, Shawshank Redemption. This is a whole different field, and you have different expectations, right? So, yeah. Let's recap the plot. It's fairly simple. If you played any Mortal Kombat game, it's a fighting game. This movie is basically all about fights, but there's a martial arts tournament between Earth and Outworld, and I think our Outworld has won 9 of the 10 Mortal Kombats, and they have to win all 10 so they can take over Earth. So our good guys have to get together and win for the sake of the world. So we got a lot of like individual stories going on in the beginning. Liu Kang wakes up from a nightmare about Shang Tsung killing his brother. So he goes on to find some answers, and lo and behold, Lord Raiden shows up and brings him along to Mortal Kombat. You got Johnny Cage, who's on set for his movies, but there's a lie being perpetuated that he fakes all his moves. So his old sensei shows up and tells him to join Mortal Kombat, which the old sensei turns out to be Shang Tsung in disguise. Kano is being used as a pawn to lure Sonya Blade onto the ship that transports all the Earthrealm people to the mystical island where they fight in Mortal Kombat. So yeah, basically they all manage to get on the boat, they get to the island, and they start their fights. Now, the thing is, they didn't tell them anything about Mortal Kombat. Like, they didn't have to say, like, you have to win them all and stuff like that. And it's just very interesting how the fights escalated, where I think the first actual fight of the Mortal Kombat itself was Liu Kang and one of like the minion dudes just fighting on the beach with a bunch of sticks, right? Like that's all it was. And then all of a sudden, cut to Johnny Cage fighting Scorpion with like a little like dragon thing coming out of his hand. Then he's suddenly transported to hell, right? and then fast forward to the one dude, I forgot his name, and there's a reason why we forget his name. He fights Goro, like a 4-armed monster, and you're like, okay, so now we're fighting for our lives? So it just, the escalation got really big, really fast. But what are your thoughts so far on like what the plot was? I mean, it's a fighting game. Yeah, is this good enough for you?
So like, obviously with Mortal Kombat back then, like, you had to dig for the lore, I believe. Especially since I believe by then, I think they were just about to release Mortal Kombat 3. I could be absolutely wrong on that. But you really had to dig for the lore, so it was kind of hard. And praise to the director for trying their best, and the scriptwriters. You know, they tried their best to kind of keep it congruent with what's going on. Overall, with like just that first scene was probably my favorite because that stuck with me.
Your brother's soul is mine.
For Mortal Kombat, every time I hear "Your soul is mine," I always picture that actor's voice with it. It's so perfect. And with the fights, like they were decent fights. There wasn't like anything big. But when it came to, I would say like the pacing of the fights and where they were transitioning into different areas, that is where it got a little bit confusing and some people could get lost.
Yeah. Overall, I think the plot was sufficient because we're not looking for some great narrative drama, right? Like this is the whole point is we want to see some fights, we want to see some cool CGI or some cool things coming out, and we'll talk about the CGI in a little bit. But
we wanted blood.
I mean overall, we wanted it to, you know, cater to the Mortal Kombat fans, and for the most part, I think the plot served that. You know, we weren't looking for it, we wanted certain things, and they just gave it to us. So, all right. So next thing we want to chat about here is this movie actually has a big influence on the IP and the franchise, right? Like, first and foremost, the theme song. I like, dude, yeah, like it's amazing how iconic that song is, right? And the soundtrack, which is for those who are not familiar with movie lingo here, a soundtrack is just like the songs that appear in a movie versus a score, which is like orchestral stuff or background things inside. Like think of Star Wars, John Williams, that's a score versus if a song's being played like Daft Punk in Tron, that's a soundtrack, right? So the soundtrack was awesome, phenomenal. Like that was the first time, like I'm a big metalhead, and that was the first time I actually enjoyed electronic music was that soundtrack back in the 90s. And that dates me to about like 9-10 years old. So
absolutely.
Any thoughts of the soundtrack there?
I mean, you just got to look at the main song. Like, that has stood the test of time. Everybody, no matter if they know about Mortal Kombat or not, knows that song to some capacity.
Yeah.
It is so engraved in culture in some way, shape, or form that it stood the test of time, even with remixes and stuff, but it never gets old. I could listen to that song again right now and just ultimately enjoy it.
And just to hammer on the point, the latest 2021 Mortal Kombat trailer uses the same theme song. I mean, of course, they remixed it into like a slower piano part, but the second you hear the da 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 da, you're like, oh, that's the theme song. Like that's it, right? And everyone knows it. So that's just to tell you, like, this was an influential portion of the movie. Some other stuff that I didn't even realize, so I did a little bit of research. Kano was supposed to be a Japanese actor, but the casting made him Australian, and ever since he showed up and spoken in an Australian accent, from here on out, he's been Australian.
Hello, baby. Did you miss me?
Right, so like, it's kind of crazy where it's kind of shaped the lore or shaped the context of the characters from here on out, right?
Oh, it's absolutely funny because like now people can't picture him not Australian.
Without.
Like it's
Exactly.
perfect. Like every iteration of Kano you always see has that Australian accent.
Absolutely. And again, one of the iconic, like I think the best performances in this movie, you know, as cheesy as it was Shang Tsung. And that character is tied to the actor named Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa. He is like ingrained with what it is to be Shang Tsung, and so much so that they brought him back for Mortal Kombat 11 as a voice actor, and they like remodeled him in the game, and everyone lost their minds when they found out, right?
Oh, it was like a big Twitter storm too, and it's funny how close he is to the character, because even before that, and I just found this out before we started recording, is that he was actually Shang Tsung in the Mortal Kombat Legacy stuff as well, which was insane to me.
Yeah.
Like,
so, yeah, some actors are kind of just intrinsically tied to their characters, and some of them love it and hate it. For example, Harrison Ford is tied to being Han Solo. He doesn't really like to play Han Solo. He's said that many times. But you've got Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa. He's just like, I'm embracing that I am Shang Tsung. Your soul is mine. That iconic line, like, yeah, he just took every single part, and it's just a nice fan service to everyone, right? All the fans. It's just great. So, alrighty, moving on to the next point I want to talk about, and I mentioned this earlier. All right, this is a New Line produced movie. New Line being the production company. What does that mean? The movies in the 90s from New Lines were all like dark, grainy, sci-fi, fantasy movies. The biggest like perpetrator is Dungeons and Dragons. Really terrible movie. But the reason why I mention this is because the CGI is like bad. Like really, really bad.
Get over here!
Obviously, back in 95 or 94 when they were producing this movie, you know, technology was really limited, and the budget, again, big, but like it's not big like $200-300 million budgets that have for Avatar or the Marvel movies and stuff like that. So you can kind of forgive it because the CGI was just, you know, not so great.
It was abysmal, but it was state of the art for that time. Like it was as good as it was gonna get.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair though, you had Terminator 2, which came out like 3 years ago, and that CGI still stands up today. The Mortal Kombat ones is just like okay, what is your worst CGI moment? Like the one that just took you out of it. Like what's a scene that you can remember that's like, oh, okay, this is bad, like real bad.
I think it definitely had to be the reptile scene, to be honest.
Yes.
Reptile, it looks so wonky to me. Like back in the day as a kid, I was like, oh, that's so cool. But I rewatched it like I would say 5 years ago, and I was like, oh, that doesn't look great anymore. You know, but as a kid, it looked great.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, when I was 9, I was like, oh yeah, this is cool, right? Because at the time CGI was like new, but it did not age well, like at all. Like Reptile looks terrible. The one that like kind of looks good but looks terrible at the same time, when Scorpion is fighting Johnny Cage, right? And okay, here's my nitpick. I'm going tangent off tangent here. Isn't the Scorpion weapon a kunai weapon with a rope?
Yeah,
Right?
basically it's a kunai tied to a rope.
Right, but then in the movie, they used like a small little dragon flying snake creature that comes out of his hand.
Yeah.
All right, when it comes out of his hand the first time, it looks pretty decent for the time, okay? Today it looks awful, but back then it looked decent. When it looks really terrible was when it like magically dies when it hits a tree. It looks so bad in that impact moment. So yeah, I don't know, like some parts were good, some parts were bad. It's just, but overall it just didn't age well. Granted, again, this was 1995. That's over 20 years ago, right? So, you know, it's kind of to be expected. However, I will say this: credit where credit is due. Goro was not CGI. He was fully animated or animatronic characters that took like 13 to 17 people to operate, which is an impressive feat unto itself. But it really explains why he's so awkward in his movements.
Yeah. That is true. Like even when Johnny Cage did his iconic move, like
Yep.
Goro just looked weird to me, and it like his facial expression still haunts me to this day. It's just so bad. But kudos to them for doing what they could do, you know, and, like Goro
Yeah,
still
no,
looked
exactly.
menacing.
Yeah, he did. Looked like awkwardly, like he looked like he was gonna fall over at any point. But again,
Yeah.
animatronic, you know, built by or operated by 13 to 17 people. Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to casting. What did you think of the casting? Did you think they were good? Obviously, we both agreed that Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa is Shang Tsung. Shang Tsung is Cary Tagawa, right? Like that's that. But anybody else that was a standout or a low point for you?
Obviously Liu Kang. I thought he was really like, I picture him, and as I see him, and I've seen him in the Liu Kang character in games, like it made sense.
Yep.
He's got the look, like obviously, and it's almost perfect synergy. He played such a good role. The actor who did play Johnny Cage, I thought he did really good for what he could do. Honestly, and I maybe people will disagree, I thought Sonya, the actor, was a little bit forgettable. It's hard to picture her for me, so I'd have to definitely go and rewatch it again.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I thought the casting, like all of them, did really, really good. I didn't think anybody really acted bad. Even
Right.
the Sonya Blade character, I don't think that she did a bad job at all. So they definitely did very well in their casting, in my personal.
Okay. Yeah, Robin Show is Liu Kang. I can't see anybody else being Liu Kang, and I can't think of Liu Kang being anybody else, right? Like they're just perfect casting in my mind. Christopher Lambert as Lord Raiden, well, that was pretty cool. I mean,
yeah.
Highlander as Christopher Lambert, in here, that's, it was good. I mean, the thing was he played a little bit of the, a little wink and a nod and to the audience, like a little fourth wall breaking, but for a video game movie in the mid 90s, that was totally acceptable. Like you could write that off. Funny enough, Cameron Diaz was supposed to play Sonya, but I think she broke her wrist or arm during training for Mortal Kombat, so they had to replace her with Bridget Wilson Sampras. So she's the one that slotted in for her. But the biggest one that I think most people didn't know, JeanClaude Van Damme was supposed to be Johnny Cage. But he turned it down to be Guile in Street Fighter.
Have you lost your mind? No. You've lost your balls.
The 1994 movie, which, I mean, to be honest, don't know if JeanClaude Van Damme being part of the Mortal Kombat movie would have made it better. But it would have been poetic because Johnny Cage, the actual character model in the video games, was originally designed around JeanClaude Van Damme, right? So would have been really nice, but did not happen.
Just to think about it too, it's like, think about that. Johnny Cage and Sonya were the ones that could have been way different, in my opinion, because of Cameron Diaz playing Sonya and JeanClaude Van Damme playing Johnny Cage. It's a very unique pairing because they, in the movie and obviously in the games as well, because in the together,
right?
That would have been such a weird synergy between the two. I would have loved to see it just to like kind of
see it.
Yeah, just to see it and see if it actually worked.
Yeah, so well, we'll never know, and it's just a what if at this moment. So
yeah.
One of the last things we want to talk about is this is a Mortal Kombat movie. You can't have Mortal Kombat without good combat scenes, right? So I found it interesting because I did a little bit of research, and on behind some of the scenes footage that they did, the producers wanted to basically bring the great-looking Hong Kong style of martial arts movie into marry it with a big-budget Hollywood style, right? And that was a pretty ambitious, but I don't think they pulled it off in this movie. I mean, you could tell where some fighters can't act, where some actors can't fight, and some a little bit of both. They can't do either, right? So they didn't put a lot of time into training or endurance training to do the long sequences of fight styles that Hong Kong martial arts movies are known for. like Matrix did in the 2000s, right? They did months and months of training with Lawrence Fishburne and Keanu Reeves and stuff like that. So here, it just like when you watch the action scenes, they just kind of took some random shots, put them together, and like when they cut them together, it's some poor choreography. But I gotta say, there are some great highlights, right? For example, Liu Kang, when he jumps off the thing or punches or kicks, I want to say Reptile off like the wall. He like jumps off the wall, kicks Reptile. I think that was pretty cool. So you could tell like some guys had the experience of fighting, but others didn't. What are your thoughts on the action sequences and the martial arts?
I mean, in general, it was okay, I think. You could definitely tell who was the fighters and who was not, like who had the actual training. Surprisingly, like I'm a little bit fuzzy on stuff, but I felt like definitely Liu Kang, the guy who played him, he knew what he was doing for the most part. That final scene against Shang Tsung, I thought was actually pretty decently choreographed.
Yes, that part at the end was really, really good. I will say that much.
They both did fantastic on it, and I was like, that it flowed really well. But there were some that were just a little weird, like the Sonya versus Kano, was a little bit. They felt off rhythm.
Give it up, baby. I've studied all your moves.
Yeah, study this!
With their fighting, and I was like,
Yeah,
that moment where you have to cringe a little bit. So
yeah, and then the thing is, like, you can tell when action sequences aren't really done well, and when they have to sub in the stunt doubles and stuff like that. It's because the cuts, right? There's a lot of cuts, weird cuts, different cuts. That's what makes like the martial arts movies from Hong Kong and whatever look great, because they do long takes. So one take, the actors have to learn it and do it, like Jackie Chan movies and stuff like that. So again, this is the mid 90s. We weren't at a point where you're training the actors you're spending the money to train the actors to learn all the choreography, get the endurance training and stuff like that. Like this was in the mid 90s where it was like, hey, this is our budget. This is what we got. We just got to work with what we have. So off we go. But I mean, overall, I agree with you. I think it was pretty good. For some fights, some were really not great, but together it was decent. And yeah, so one last thing we wanted to mention here was this movie was PG-13. Can you believe it, Tysra? PG-13.
It's funny because of how Mortal Kombat is now. Thinking PG-13, it's like, what? They made a PG-13 Mortal Kombat? How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, well, to be fair, back then, their target audience was teenagers. And you can't get into the movie unless you snuck in. And, stuff like that. So it makes sense that they made it PG-13. They kind of got away with some of the more graphic stuff. Like when Johnny Cage, like, slices through Scorpion's skull. Well, he's a skeleton or some demon. So, okay, it's not a human being. And it was spurting red like goo, not blood. Okay. Or when Reptile dies, it's just a bunch of like insects that come out of him to represent his guts. Okay, like they kind of worked around it. Kind of satisfying.
Ways, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, as decent as this was, I think when I speak for a lot of Mortal Kombat fans, we want to see a truly R-rated, gore-infested killing that the franchise is like known for, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what we have with Mortal Kombat coming out in the end of the month in April. So overall, I want to say that this 1995 rendition of Mortal Kombat, the original version, again back in the 90s, it was a Mortal Kombat movie that was made for Mortal Kombat fans. If you were a fan of the franchise and you saw the movie, you would have loved it. And if you didn't care for it, you needed to be quite inebriated or taking some kind of substance to get yourself through the movie. But if you were into the franchise or IP, I think overall, it's safe to say it's a guilty pleasure, right, Tysra?
Oh, absolutely. Like it's one that even 5 years ago when I rewatched it, like it was still fun to watch. Because it's got that little bit of nostalgia factor, but also like it's Mortal Kombat. You go into it knowing that it's not going to be just about the acting. It's going to be about like the whole atmosphere. I felt like Mortal Kombat, the first movie, captured that like whole atmosphere about it, especially from starting scene 1 to the ending scene. It was poetic in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, again, we have the reboot coming up at the end of April. This too looks like it's produced by Mortal Kombat fans. The director is a first-time director, the writer is a first-time writer, but based on the trailer, they really encapsulated what we as fans kind of want to see.
Yeah.
The intense fights, the beautiful CGI, the great fatalities and gore and intensity of violence that we know it for, right? And that's why it's rated R. I think it's gonna be good. So let us know if you guys are hyped for the new movie. If you've seen the original Mortal Kombat movie, what do you think of it? Agree with our takes or disagree? Anything else you want to say, Tystra?
Guys, just be ready to have fun with this new Mortal Kombat movie coming out, because it's gonna get intense and it's gonna border that line. I've heard from Twitter and all that other stuff where many of the people that were part of that production, they had to scale back a bunch of stuff. So be prepared to go in there as a fan and come out loving the franchise again. I'm almost certain of that.
Me too, guys. So, all right. With that said, Tystra and Nolar, we're out.
Bye, dudes.